So I wanted to say a couple things first before we kind of get into the panel part. And so if anyone has not or doesn't, if you can follow us and subscribe to the YouTube channel we have. I'm trying to be more confidently saying that because it sounds silly to me still, but it really is important. I think us putting stuff out allows us to get more attention to the work we're doing and people aware of like some of the events and the stuff that we're putting out. And so if you can, that would be one way to really help us for sure. Also, there's information out there about an art show. I think Dad might have talked to a lot of you before you came in. So at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design on January 19th, there's a show called Against the Odds, and it's going to be a lot of artwork by formerly and mostly currently incarcerated people. Some of the stuff is great. I'm surprised at the quality of a lot of it. I knew a lot of great stuff was made in prison, but even some of it shocked me. So it's really creative stuff that she's got to put in that show, the Portrait Society Gallery. So there's some more information on the table. Some pieces are here, for example. So this is something to keep in mind coming up. That show is going to be for like 2 months. I think Debbie can yell out, "You're wrong" if I'm wrong. But it'll be here for about 2 months, and then it'll travel across the state to different locations as well. And we're gonna have an event, I think February 2nd, a panel, and there's gonna be a lot more coming with that, so just kind of keep that on your radar. And the last thing I want to mention too is, before we go into the panel, is the language part. So I can't speak exactly for Kaleigh and then for Roy, part of our organization, but I know personally, I'm not really big on pushing people heavy on to use person-centered language. I just try to do it. I think we just try to do it amongst ourselves, but I don't always feel comfortable making a huge deal. So sometimes you may have heard language used by people, ex-offender, and some of them. It's just, part of that interview, part of the flow of it. It's going to be what it is. And I think it's an interesting component that a lot of us that have done time don't too much care about the language. It seems to be something that people who haven't done time have more of an interest in. So it's really complex, and you're never going to find language that people are all happy with. Somebody's going to be offended no matter what you call them in this space. So but that's a whole different panel we can talk about. So I just want to point that out. So joining me here, we have, and I'm going to read these off because I do not remember everything, so I'll make sure I get it right. So we have Ed Hennings, is entrepreneur, author, speaker, and reentry consultant. We have Roberto Hernandez, who's the owner of Bolts and Holes LLC, which is a CNC machine shop in Aurora, Illinois. He fancies himself the most handsome man in the universe. Every time I post, he puts underneath it, "You didn't say the most handsome," so there you go. Good luck. Participate in your life. Paul Schmitt is a former police officer of 32 years and currently a mentor at Partners in Hope, which is the organization that Adam works at, that was portrayed in that video with building bridges and law enforcement. It's a local wraparound reentry organization as well. It's not just that program. We have Kaleigh Atkinson is a visual artist, my partner in humanizing, as I call her. And that's the phone installation on the hallway is the one that she mostly did, but we collaborated on with Terry Strughoff, who's here as well for the Illness Center, for an event at Tommy Thompson's farm, which is a whole other story if you ever want to know about where that was and what that's called. So I want to start out by kind of connecting with Paula here with your background and kind of the experiences you had. So how did you used to view people who you arrested and sent to prison?
That was easy. They did the crime, they do the time. On to the next one. Yeah. And it was nothing more than a warehousing. You can't spend in law enforcement, you can't spend a lot of time thinking about every single case you investigate, because you would probably go crazy. There are some horrific things that we've seen. Stuff that the news can't report. I mean, the reporters see a lot of these things that we report and they go, "We can't put this on the news." So they've been exposed to an awful lot. Because we've been in that position, it's easier to just numb yourself and just move on. But for me, I'll let you go on to your next one and then I'll go
on. Feel free at any point just to say what you mean, then we don't have to kind of go with that flow, but I didn't want to interrupt there if you had something to say. But the next question, I think, is what you're going to get to about when did this view begin to change for you and why?
And that's where I was kind of going into, is I always treated people that I had to deal with, criminals, detainees, victims, I always treated them the way I wanted to be treated. And when I talked to somebody, I always wanted to remember that I want to talk to them the way I would expect someone to talk to my mom. And generally that works really well. I think especially with some prisoners or felons or however you refer to it, after years and years and years of doing this, you become more humanizing to them. And I think as time went on, I mean, I am a born again Christian, I am a follower of God, but I think when we talk about labels, and I don't mean to embarrass anybody, but if someone in the room is gay, if someone in the room is a lesbian, if somebody in the room is black, if somebody in the room is Jewish, these are all people that have been horrifically marginalized for years. But we don't treat them today any differently than anyone else. Why can't we do that for felons? They've been marginalized, and the work and the people I see at Partners in Hope, which is just a fantastic organization, even when I was approaching retirement, I knew God wanted me still connected with prisoners. I absolutely know that. And I got connected with Partners in Hope, and these guys and gals have absolutely changed their lives. And I can, one of the most remarkable things I can say is I don't trust anyone around my kids, ever. I could have 90% of the people that I deal with every day in my home, and I would not in the least bit be concerned. It wouldn't bother me, because they have changed their lives, and they have done it, and they've made the strides. So rather than marginalizing them, rather than identifying them, rather than putting them down like we put down all the other socioeconomic groups, why don't you give them a chance too? We do everybody else.
It's a good segue to somebody who has gone well beyond all of the, I think, thoughts of limitations that we have on people that have a record to end. Kind of talk about, you lead with your story. That's what I think you've never, at least as far as I know, you ever shied away from that part of your background. You made it into, so many beneficial things for other people. So, what led you to not only tell your story, but lead with your story?
For me, you're up. I think for me, the moment that I was incarcerated, it just hit me immediately. As soon as I walked into the facility, they walked me in, my first day in there, and I just looked around, and I seen just thousands upon thousands of broken men. Men from all walks of life, small men, big men, 6'6", 280 pounds, muscles on top of muscles, but broken. Talented men, broken. Intelligent men, broken. So I seen that like in the first 5 minutes. I was a 24-year-old young man, and I knew then, I said, you know what? I need some hope, first of all, but second of all, everybody in here, we need some hope. And I decided to be that hope. I decided that day, not when I came home, because people say, you've been home these last 6 years, you've been blazing. 26 years. The 20 years I was in there, I spent every day saying, you can do it. You can do it. You have to do it. Not you can do it, you have to. So you gotta change that mindset to I can, and you gotta put a little bit of more oomph on it. You gotta push a little bit more harder. You gotta go, you gotta get up a little bit more early. You gotta stay up a little. You have to do this. And that was just my mentality, man. So ever since then, just like when Adam was speaking, I was in youth awareness, talking to the 7th graders. My whole time, these last 26 years of my life, has just been dedicated every day to be an example. So when I lead with my story, I know somebody in here that's not even experienced the justice system. They're going through some adversity. something right around the corner that they gotta fight through. And my story might be the inspiration that they need to fight through.
And so I've always been curious as you go around and you tell your story and you lead with it in more and more areas as you become, I think, called on a lot more, it seems, over the years, for, obviously very good reasons. What's the contrast between, and this is always like a curiosity of my own as well, as I kind of, start to speak more and sometimes get called on more, and the discomfort I might have with it. So I'm curious, what is the contrast you've experienced between the reception to your story from people who've been incarcerated, who are familiar with that, and people who haven't been and aren't familiar with it?
I guess it's very similar. It's not much contrast, but the contrast that I can find in it is people that haven't been incarcerated, they always asking questions and they're in awe about how do you do that much time and come out without being, visibly, messed up, to their eyes. And they're just in awe of some of the things that they see. But the same happens with people that I've been in with. They're in awe, but I'm one of theirs. So they feel more of a connection. So when I go into the prisons or I'm talking to somebody that know me from prison and we talking, I can see that they taking some pride into even the things that I'm doing. They feeling it, they into it like, man, we doing it. It's not an Ed's doing it, it's a we doing it. Whereas people that hasn't been through it with us, they kind of feel like, man, you was doing really well. But the people that have been in, they saying, we doing really well. So that's the contrast.
Have you encountered kind of opposition or pushback from people who don't have a record, or the usual stereotypical viewpoint type of crowd? Have you encountered that as you've gone and told your story more?
Not a lot. I don't get a lot of opposition, which a lot of people ask me, like, man, you haven't ran into your victims? I'm like, no. You haven't ran into their friends? And I say, no. But I try to put motivation out every morning. I wake up early. I try to put some motivation out before I get to working or going to the gym or whatever. I try to put something motivating or inspiring out on social media. And one time I put something motivational out. So I said, man, I served 20 years in prison. I changed my life. I own a couple businesses and this, that, and the other. And somebody said at the bottom, yeah, you took taxpayers' dollars. Yeah, fine and dandy. And I was like, oops. So I mean, what can I say to that? Some things you just have to say, hey man, I told myself if I got another opportunity, I didn't say, if I got a second chance, I wouldn't need a third. That was my promise. So when opportunity presents itself to Ed Hennings, my plan, because I squandered so many in my early life, now when opportunity presents itself, I want to be prepared to make good on it. So wherever it comes from, if the opportunity presents itself, I want to be the type of person that can make you say, man, I gave him a chance and he did right with it.
So on the sheets that most of you have, I hope everyone has one, there's a QR code, a couple of them. So one is to, is Linktree, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk because when I was watching the video, what's so funny is that that's like a whole different businessman that I saw. You're not even doing any of that, you're doing new stuff all over the place. So if you want to take a second to talk about what's actually changed since then.
Well, I've been guilty of this probably all of my life. When I hear my mom talk, or people that knew me in my community when I was just a little guy, they always talk about how I never was still. My big wheel was constantly rolling. I was going around. So I look now and I'll be like, man, they must be right, because I really don't sit still too long. I was in Houston Sunday. I left Houston and I hit Memphis. I came to Milwaukee today and I'll be in Atlanta on Saturday. So I just keep going, but just my growth as a man, as a person, as an entrepreneur. As you continue to grow, I was listening to Mark Zuckerberg, and people know him for opening or starting Facebook, and social media giant that he is. Facebook wasn't his first business. He probably tried 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 other things, and then social media, Facebook took off. So I think I'm no different. I started out with a barbershop because my 20 years in prison, I just dreamed of having my own barbershop. I said, man, I just get out and open this barbershop, I'll be set. So a year after being released, I finally opened up that barbershop, and I was still hungry. And the guy sat in my chair, and he was telling me about the trucking business. And immediately I said, oh, I think I was in the wrong business. So I got me a truck, and here we go, 4 years later, I've done so many things in between, from public speaking, which I still do, but my latest endeavor from there is some things. I sold my barbershop. I got more and more deeply attention to the trucking community around America in so many states, dealing with truckers and learning the things about trucking, the ins and outs of it. And the entrepreneur in me came up with an idea to start my own footwear for truckers. It's sort of like, your legend brands, Timberland, Carhartt, they're your legend brands when it comes to work apparel. So I said, hey, truckers are into the workforce. I'm a trucker. I know what we need as far as footwear driving around this country and driving around the community. So I came up with that idea and gave birth to it. And not only just the modern times, I thought of the idea, let me make it look a little better than what my granddad used to wear when he came up work. So that's the thing. I gave it a little more flair, for the younger generation, because we trying to pull guys from the age of 20, 21 into trucking. And with that, the younger folk want something that look a little better. So I cater to that market. And that's what I'm giving birth to now, working hard though. Oh, by the way, a shameless plug, that's what the shirt is. The shirt is a drip, like the new guys call fashion drip. So, you dripping and driving. You dripping and driving.
Robert. So Robert is
Robert is nervous.
In our, well, me of course, right? So that's why I'm trying to talk you, trying to get this hopscotch going. But so you participant in our second season, as was shown, and when I met Robert the week we recorded this video, because Jeremy, who's a friend of mine, who's my former cellie, he sent me a text message saying, a post, right? It was a post that you made about acknowledging, your inspiration to get into CNC. And so if you want to talk a little bit about what Jeremy's influence and seeing somebody doing that work who's formerly incarcerated and leading with this story. I mean, Jeremy doesn't lead with this story in the way that some of us do, but he doesn't shy from it as well. So just if you want to talk a bit about what that, how that impact was for you to see Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I address that, Ed, I was really looking forward to getting my beard like yours, but it sounds like you already changed businesses, so I'm about to move on from that one. Shannon, Kaleigh, I want to say that I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. It's something my wife and myself we will remember for the rest of our lives, right? It was a human experience, right? To be able to tell your story and not be judged, right, and be so open about it, again, that human experience, man, it's just, I'm gonna take that with me for I don't know how long. So I appreciate you guys for that. I really do. Both Darcy and I do, and we consider you guys friends. I don't know, where you guys are at with it, but we do. How's Shannon doing? So, hey, it is what it is, right? So back to his question, right? So Jeremy, you guys saw
every Saturday this month.
So you guys saw Jeremy on the screen earlier. So I'm a machinist. My name is Roberto Hernandez, right? Owner, operator of Bolts and Holes LLC. We're out of Aurora, Illinois. And I'm super passionate about what I do. I love what I do. I'm a machinist, CNC machinist. And I spent so much time, I gave so much time to my employer. I opened up the shop, I closed the shop, first one there, last one to leave, from answering phones to delivering. And I just realized, man, I can do this for myself. Why am I doing this for somebody else? I can do this for myself. I'm back up a little bit too, my dad was incarcerated, my brothers were incarcerated, my brother was incarcerated. Most of my friends were in gangs, incarcerated. A couple were killed, but, so I knew I had a sense of business, right? It wasn't the right business, but I had an understanding, you know, from, you know, I'm not gonna get into all that, but, so, listening to Jeremy, so back to Jeremy, I got on LinkedIn one day and started networking, and like, man, how am I gonna make this happen, you know, and I somehow saw a post of Jeremy, his story resonated with mine, I was locked up, he was locked up, right? Oh, shit, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know how
This is an adult crowd. It's
All
like,
right, so no kids, right? Shit, you know, I understand him. Like you said, that's one of mine. You know, I'm one of his. He's one of mine. You know, like, damn, if he can do it, I can do it. So, you know, I had the idea of doing it, right? But it made it attainable, right? And I reached out to him. I asked him. I don't know how many questions I asked Jeremy, but you know, he was willing to listen and then to respond. And I do want to say, you know, I'm impressed by Jeremy. I really am. He motivated me. I've done business with Jeremy as of a month ago, right, Darcy? 2 weeks ago, we actually did business together. So what he's saying is true. You know, he wants to help. We did business together. I spoke to him on the phone, and this dude, he's sharp. He gave me more information. There's so much untapped potential that I need to reach into that he's still motivating me. So yeah, to answer your question.
it's because it's a similar story with me a little bit with Jeremy. Just to go off script here a little bit. As Ed was saying as well, that iron sharpens iron was a huge part for me when I was in prison, because as you know, kind of just wanting to highlight other people and to promote other people and their stories. I'm still competitive, always been competitive. And so when I first got to prison where I met Jeremy, I saw him in the day room, 20 books, speaking Spanish, Italian. I'm like, no, you can't just outdo me like this. So it was a situation where just because of that, you know, I started wanting to be around him because he made me want to do more and be better. But I know that was a turning point in my incarceration of like going from learning a little bit, spending time reading and writing to like, okay, I'm on it. Like now this is more of a scheduled thing.
Yeah,
like, he makes you up. Yeah,
yeah,
like,
I'm stepping it up. I have
right.
it. Yeah, I have
So
it.
no, I definitely feel
Absolutely.
that. So we when we spoke in your house, it was really an interesting conversation we had, and you made a comment about how things we were talking about were things that you didn't feel you could speak to, you know, normal people about when it comes to your history and your background in prison. And what I found interesting is that, and I experienced that, I think, and my experience that is that there are parts to that story that somebody else might not understand fully, but they really don't mean anything, or they actually mean something good sometimes, and they just come across as like the context. But I think what, and I'm not sure how to ask this exactly, because it is kind of a heavy question to go. It's about 2 hours we went from after we started talking at your house. But I guess what was it for you that you felt kind of a comfort with us, but not with other people from your past that you would like to talk about sometimes that's relevant to your story?
Well, I mean, we walked in each other's shoes, right?
Mm.
So, similar paths. I can open up to you. Katie was super cool, super like pleasant to be around. You don't know what, it has a negative connotation, right? This guy's been locked up. I don't know if I gotta hide my wallet around this guy, right? Or my phone, or is he gonna reinforce what I'm stereotyping, what I believe an offender, an inmate, a convict, whatever, is he gonna do that? Like, is this guy gonna kick my dog or something? Like, what's gonna happen? Like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not into that. That's why I gotta keep my mouth closed.
He's not in dog kicking.
Yeah, no, we don't condone
takeaway.
kicking dogs. No, please don't quote that. The other thing is, like, you don't know how it's, once people do know, right, that you've been incarcerated, right? You don't know if it's affecting anything as far as, like, for me, I'm a business owner now, right? I don't know if I tell somebody and they're gonna be like, no, it's not affecting anything, right? But in your face, they're gonna tell you it's not affecting anything, but behind your back, I had a conversation with another business owner. I had my car accident, and I was like in a scramble. I wasn't working. I need to do something, right? I have a beautiful wife, my children. I have to provide, right? And I reached out to a guy. They were like, "Yo, this guy's super helpful. He runs the Boys and Girls Club here in the area. He's always trying to help people." And I reached out to him. The guy's like, "Yes, I'm gonna give you work. You're gonna be okay." And I'm in a neck brace, right? And I'm telling the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't care that you've been incarcerated, right?" But the guy who assigned the work was like, "I'm not gonna give him the work. I'm not gonna give it to him." They never told me why, but like he leads with his story, I led with my story, because I thought I was reaching out to somebody who would help me, but eventually, I mean, this is the guy I do the most work for right now. It is. The guy's like, "No, you're gonna do work for him. Send it to him. No ifs, ands, or buts about it." My best customer right now.
I think there's something really powerful in that is, you're gonna take a risk either way. When you lead with your story, you don't lead with it. So like, I know personally for me, I would rather take the risk to lead with it and let the cards fall where they may, instead of shy from it and let the cards fall where they may. And so that's a perfect example of like, you led with it, didn't work out maybe at first,
Right.
it comes around. It won't always, sometimes it won't.
Right.
Maybe a lot of times it won't, but.
You'll never know what you
Right.
lost out on, right? Like, it's gonna affect something, no matter what. That is why, like you said, you have to change the narrative. We don't know. We'll
Or
never
correct
know.
it,
You'll never know when people see us. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, I'm blabbing off, but you'll never know, man. You'll never know, man. I'm gonna give it to Kaleigh.
Yes, Kaleigh is great. Please take the mic from me. So before I ask Kaleigh the first question here, I just want to publicly say that, thank you. None of this would exist if it weren't for Kaleigh. If it weren't for Kaleigh, that first season, this is momentum we have, the award show, all of the correcting the narrative stuff we do comes from Kaleigh. Just, I don't know how the universe put us together, and we had this, incredible connection on this work that we wanted to do together. But yeah, that first year of you starting out and doing things for free and just being there as much as you could for this it wouldn't exist. So I just want to make sure you know that I will never not acknowledge that, publicly especially. And again, we could talk forever, as we usually do about this topic. This is talking shop for us, and these conversations can go everywhere. But when we started doing these videos and when we were selecting the ones to show here, we wanted to highlight the variety, the diversity of people that are, have criminal records, from abolitionists to pro-law enforcement, from different races, from religious to secular, people who are just trying to live their life, to people who are actively, like Carl said, trying to get all in the way. Like this, it's not a monolith. Did you expect that when you started doing these videos and this work?
No, I didn't expect that at all. And also, if you know Shannon, there's always it just magically works out. So it's like you say we had all those people, but I also think they were just like conveniently scheduled and then it worked out. Do you know what I mean though? So for me personally, like as a storyteller and a person behind the camera, like I always get an education and learn something from the people in front. And so when even just watching now and seeing them all put together, like Carl is speaking to Jason and Ed is speaking to Adam, it's just so cool to see all these different perspectives, because we don't have a generalized agenda. And I think a lot of people that do this work do have an agenda. And that's what I think is really refreshing, is like, we're just literally telling your story and saying, take away what you want from it. This isn't working. We think this is a creative way to go this route. So I just think that was super interesting. And I'm happy that we are able to share so many different perspectives in just 1 year's time.
Yeah, it was crazy looking back at that, to see some of this stuff.
So you've adjusted several things from your initial outreach ideas and plans with correcting the narrative campaign. One that stood out to me was the decision to stop telling people why you went to prison. Can you talk about why you made that choice? But also, I remember the day that we had this conversation. It was that podcast.
Yeah, it was, we had a podcast together where, I guess I've gone through, as anybody does in this work, right? We go through stages of trying to find ourselves and how we're gonna, be after incarceration and deal with having a record in your story. And we had somebody who was formerly incarcerated. He runs a white collar group, actually. It's like a support group for federal criminals. Need using the word. But for people that come out of the BOP, basically for white collar crimes. And he asked me in this podcast, me and Kaleigh were doing together, to like basically atone for and dive into my crime. And so of course I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And it wasn't in a like, why should I don't owe anybody type of thing. It was more like, what is this helping right now in this moment of diving into this and like just bearing my soul about this crime. And so at the end of it, Kaleigh, like, I think messaged me and was like, I feel super uncomfortable for you. Like, I wanted to say something. And so I made the decision in that moment that I'm never gonna, let somebody dictate how I'm telling my story. And I don't like to push back a lot, but for me, that was like a defining moment for the way that I go forward. Because if I'm in this space where I'm telling my story and talking about storytelling, I'm trying to help people understand how they can carry their story and be empowered by it. I have to help them understand. And I think a central tenet of that is helping people ask better questions. A person deserves absolutely to know if I'm a stable person, if I'm really changed, if I'm really somebody they can be around. But you're not gonna get to know that by asking me what I went to prison for. You're not gonna get to know that by asking me to break down my crime and how I feel about it. Those are just, false sense of security questions, right? So I wanna help you know what you need to know, but ask better questions. So let me help you ask better questions to get there. We have this interesting thing where anybody in society we won't walk up to and say, what's the worst thing you ever did? Tell me the worst part of your life. We don't do that, but we ask a person if they have a record, and suddenly we think we know everything about them. The only way you can ever get to know somebody is to get to know them, right? That's the only way ever to get to that. So we feel that we can shortcut that by finding out if you have a record or not in life, and it's just an absolute false sense of security. Another thing for me as well that I've kind of, these stages, there's always layers to everything, is me finding out that how I carry my story has to change, right? I can't just tell this story from a bleeding heart, just pouring it all out every time. It has to be sustainable. Yeah. So I have to be able to find ways that, it's not the weight that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it in life. And so if I'm telling my story from carrying that, if I'm leading with it all the time, I have to do that in ways that I can still move. It's not gonna destroy me by the end of the week. And so if I have to take parts out, not address certain things, help you understand what's relevant and what's not, then I need to lead with that more and be an example for people coming out, people that we're connected to in the other side of our work, the prison side of our work. So it was just all those things that I didn't know it would take that theme at that moment, but I knew that it felt so unhelpful and just negative when he asked me that, and I was like, not gonna do that again, and I'll just figure out reasons why it makes sense more and more over time. And so yeah, that was the beginning of that. And I think one of the stories that Tom Jens was he's an editorialist, a reporter, a writer for Shepherd Express, and he asked me to do an interview, and we did an interview, and I told him beforehand, I said, I'm not going to answer some of these questions. I just want to make you aware that some of these questions that you might stereotypically ask, I'm not going to answer. I think he as well, he had profiled you, Tom did about a year before. And so he was kind of pushing back, like, oh, well, people like to know that. I'm like, oh, okay, but that doesn't help. Like, I don't care if you want to know that. That's not the point. And so we did the interview, and he, kind of stayed away from some things. I could tell he was uncomfortable with his questions because it was like him being told not to ask certain things, or rather, not being able to just ask whatever he wanted to. It was more, I think, the discomfort for him. So afterwards, he sends me the whole article, and I'm like, dude, I'm either rewriting this or you're not publishing this, because this isn't it. And so he was like, oh, okay, well, I think we just might not do it. And I was like, cool. So like a day later, he's like, go ahead and make your changes. And so I rewrote a lot of little things, and he accepted it. And then afterwards, he even said, I actually appreciate you pushing back on that. I appreciate the way that you stood by what you were trying to do, and I think the article was better for that. And so it was like, for me, an affirmation of, it's okay to push back on these things, and if people don't go with it, they don't, but maybe they will come around, like in that example. So yeah, that's a very long story answer to that question, I think, but I think it's important.
It's also cool, like, to see how we've evolved learning as we go, like with things like that. It wasn't like you just came out and said, I'm never gonna tell my story again. It was something hit you hard through this work, and then it changed the direction that even like this stuff is going for season 2.
So you corrected his narrative.
I corrected his narrative.
So many people we've talked to or interviewed talk about how the whole changed their lives. But at the same time, the whole is this totally destructive experience that is being opposed all over the world. What's going on there?
So, we've done a number of videos, and I think you'll see this as well when you talk to people who are formerly incarcerated, that some aspect of being in SEG or in the hole for them was like an epiphany, like Adam talked about. He was at the peak of his misbehavior. I love the way he speaks about things. So, but that is a common theme, and people hear that and they think the whole works, but that's not what it is. You're overlearning or underlearning that lesson. What works is separation. What works is peace. What works is getting away from the chaos and time to sit and think. And so, you take out what worked there and you leave what didn't, and actually destroys all the people and dehumanizes all the people that we're not getting stories from. Because you can't confuse the parts of a person who got through it and is doing well with the parts of the people you never will talk to because they no longer exist, or they can't speak their story because things like the whole just absolutely destroy them. So it's just kind of making sure people understand that, like, I'm not a success story from prison. I'm not proof prison works. Like, I am proof that somehow, some way, I got to this point despite that experience, and there are takeaways that I can help people understand work from that experience, but it ain't prison, and it definitely is not the whole. So we met a few months, like 3 months after I got out, from an organization called The Way Out was the one that connected us. And we instantly connected on this shared vision we have with this work, which is like, just get in and figure it out. We're broke as hell, whatever, just eat ramen noodles, like just, prison living version of the work, basically, like, whatever. And so this is like what I call soil change work, the stuff that we do, because ideally it'll make everybody's job and work easier because people will see this issue in population differently. So you want to talk a bit about the mantra that you use that expands on this work to apply to everyone?
Yeah, when we first met, I was starting this project that I'm still working on called My Story Medicine, which is basically this, but people with all kinds of fall to your knees moments is what I call it. And so a yoga teacher of mine that I've been studying with since I was 17 at one point during practice said, we are all the walking wounded. And that just like hit me as things do at the right time. And so that's always been what I lead with my work, is like telling the story that we are all connected because we are all going through something. And a lot of the other stories and documentaries that I've worked on have focused on that fall to your knees moment, whether it's addiction, eating disorders, depression, suicidal ideation. And I was really struggling to get that idea and motivation to like do, because when you work video work time and then personal, you don't want to keep doing that. So when you came into the picture, it was like, oh, this is how I can kind of marry all of these things together, specifically with prison reentry. And it was just so powerful because once we started going, these fall to your knees moments, whether you're in recovery from a heroin addiction or an eating disorder, or you just got out of 20-year prison sentence, like everybody almost had the same exact story. And I just thought that was super powerful. So that's what connected me to keep going, to have the motivation. And it's really like what we've all been saying. It's just like, we are all humans. At the end of the day, we all have a story to tell. We want to use it to empower ourselves and other people, because you never know who might need this message at a like very vital time in their life.
Maybe some last thoughts here from everybody. I feel like it might to Paul. Here's Paul. What do you think would work for people who are in the system, like cops, POs, those personnel, to help them see this population, differently? Because I'm not making a broad brush there, but there's a lot of stigmatization in that work, both because, as you said, numbing is kind of part of it, but also I think there's a mentality a lot of people have going in, as Jason talked about in his criminal, justice professorship, that he wants to address that before these kids get into those roles. So, like, just curious what your thoughts on some of the things that might work to help that group see this population differently.
Wow, that is a great question. Once you humanize everyone, once you have everyone on an equal playing field, that's where it starts. It truly does. It's not, for years and years and years, it's always us versus them, me versus you. The Department Department of Corrections, no offense to the Department of Corrections, they have some wonderful staff, but they're not correcting any behavior. They're not. Yeah, we're not. We do the same thing over and over and over again, and they can't figure out why people are reoffending. Well, here's a thought. Why don't you let people like us into the prison, and let's start ministry groups, let's start education, let's start, these conversations. And this is one of the most profound things. I remember being down at Partners in Hope one time, and there was a guy who had just been released, and we were mingling after dinner, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." And he goes, "What's an atom?" And I said, "A what?" And he goes, "An atom. They're all over the place." And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." He goes, "Yeah, there's these machines, and they say atom, ATM." He had been incarcerated for so long, he didn't even know what an ATM was. Okay, if you're trying to get somebody and prepare somebody for being released, you're doing a very poor job if they don't know what an ATM is. Where are the basic skills? Where are these things? And I think that's where we have to go. We're not making progress here.
I was gonna ask Ed and Robert the same thing. Is what do you think is needed to help improve, correcting the narrative type of work? I think anywhere, not just here, but anywhere.
I think an open mind. I think a lot of things that's going on in society today is what I've been told. And I've been told it so much for so long that I have shut off anything other than what I've been told. And I even had to learn, coming from, the urban community, I'm still learning about so many different things that's contributing to the narrative. I watched the news a lot when I was in prison. That was like watching the movies. I would post up in front of the TV and watch the news. And it's because I grew up that way. My parents and grandparents watched the news every day. Even today, I was at my grandma's house. The news was on. But I don't watch the news as much anymore. It's because when I looked at the news, and now that I've been in prison and I've been a part of the criminal community and all of those things, I don't watch it with the same eye anymore. Because with an open mind, I learned that, wait a minute, this is not crime in the sense that they say it's crime. Because when I looked and I studied while I was in prison, I seen in Spain, I seen in Mexico, I seen in Russia, I seen in China, I seen in Africa, I seen everywhere that I studied and looked where there was poverty, there was low morals and high crime, there was chaos. And I looked in my own community and I looked around and I studied and it said poor people live 14.6 years less than somebody that's well-to-do. And I said, oh my God. So now when I look at the news and I see crime, I try to figure out, is that a poor community or is that a well-to-do community? And 99.9% of the time, it's a poor community. Then I started to study poverty and I seen that how vicious poverty is. And I didn't even know I was in poverty because I was a kid and I was just having fun. And I looked around and I said, wow, I succumbed to poverty. The ills of poverty got the best of me. Am I accountable? Yes. But if we're gonna troubleshoot, and if we're gonna figure out what the problem is and we're gonna make this a better place, then just like going to the doctor, we gotta figure out the root of why you're ill. So me being a person of color, we taking it personal because they saying the statistics is saying African American males is committing all the crime. African poor people. We poor and trying to, it's just like a mountain. If you gotta climb a small mountain, more people gonna get over it. But the higher that mountain get, the less of us gonna get over it. And that mountain sometimes for people that's in impoverished communities is so high. It's insurmountable. And people can say, well, if I was in their shoes, well, if you haven't eaten in 3 days, the grocery store got some grapes, there's some cherries and some strawberries in there, and they just might get ate by any one of us who hasn't eaten in 3 or 4 or 5 days. So it's just all about, like he said, about walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. And those are the type of things that we gotta talk about more. We gotta open up to that narrative more and have that conversation to understand like what you're looking at ain't always what it seems. But if you're not open-minded, then it's just gonna continue
So sometimes if you are just kind of what you think about,
Oh, man.
you know, you gotta
Yeah.
follow it. I did this on purpose.
I gotta
you
hit a
gotta
whole
follow
one
it.
up and mark
Right.
the wires in. I mean, it's the same thing. You gotta, you gotta keep an open mind. You have to. You can't forget that you're dealing with another human being, right? Everybody is one mistake away from being in the same predicament that we were in, right? We're human, man. And stuff like, I gotta go back to that, man. Stuff that you guys do, man, it's telling the story. That is important. That is important. If you would have never started this, I never would have reached out to Jeremy. He showed me, like, it's something I was telling my wife the other night, like, you know, growing up, we never had bank accounts. You know, my dad sold drugs. Everything was cash. I never had a bank account as an adult. That was new to me. What do I need one for? We got cash, right? And then Jeremy's like, send me these parts. He's like, you got a UPS account, right? Yeah, right? Yeah, Jeremy, yes I do. You know, I'm telling my wife, hey Darcy, how are we gonna send this, you know? And man, Jeremy, I can't, you know, toot his horn enough, man. He showed me how to do it. You know, each one teach one, right?
Yes.
Each one teach one.
Katie's at her feeling. So yeah, I mean, I just want to kind of make some closing comments about a lot of this. I think in society, especially with the political season being not over, but you know, at least ebbed for the moment because of the election last night. We think that we live our life according to facts and the real, and we know what's going on. The reality is that all of us live our life by the stories we've internalized and the ones we tell ourselves. That's really all it is at the end of the day. The stories we tell ourselves in the morning can dictate sometimes our life until we stop telling ourselves that same story. It's just really as simple as that I found in this work. And a lot of this is, like you said, just discovering it. I didn't think a lot of this through when I got out. It's just I saw that from my perception, the narrative was underneath all of the bad policies and all of the behavior and treatment in prisons, and a lot of the way we view certain people is because of a lack of exposure and just a lack of understanding of the complexity and the tapestry of these narratives that people actually are experiencing and that are out there. And so when it comes to this space in particular, what I hope people take away from this work is to kind of become a bit of an evangelist, is to be more comfortable challenging people when they say things that are stereotypes, that are just not helpful or are very much against seeing somebody instead of just reacting and going away. So, I mean, that for me, in the end of the day, with all this, it would be ideal if everyone that sees this work is a little more or a lot more comfortable challenging people and telling other people's stories in a way that is more honoring of who they actually are versus little convenient labels and so forth. So, if there's anything that you all have that's feedback outside of today, if there's no time, or if just something comes up, we're always open to ideas. We love to have the interaction with what we're doing, how we can do things better. I think I have a terrible habit of wanting people to tell me what I did wrong instead of what I did right, and that's not a joke. It's actually I think I've been told many times, just accept compliments. So yeah, that would be my request that everybody's an action step in ending this, and going to a Q&A if anyone has questions. And then where's Josh with Madman Mike Changer? Assuming anyone has questions, actually. Okay, yes.
His feet are too small for someone my height. I'm just glad I can just stand up.
My name is Queenie, and I didn't really know what to expect when I saw this on Facebook. I'm an independent editor
editor and publisher for incarcerated men of color who are authors. And I have 2 books for you actually that they wanted you to have. The last one that we published is called The Shaping of a Convict Anthology. And some of these authors told their story for the first time. And so, and now you can, it's out in public. And it's really difficult for them because, as you know, in prison, when you bare your soul, you have no one to go to afterwards. So that, they suffer in silence once they do that. It's a very long process. Some of them are handwritten manuscripts that are received. Some of them are typewritten. And one thing that I'm just a white woman from a small town. My husband moved here, and that's how it's a long story how I got involved in this. And I don't charge anything. This is volunteer work that I do. And it's been a great education because, like you mentioned earlier, at first it was you did the crime, you do the time. That was my attitude. That's how I was brought up. And once I got involved in this work, it was a huge education. These men that I work with are working from the inside on projects for community that is just mind-blowing to change the criminal mentality. And it's so impressive. There's so much brilliance behind those bars. It's just amazing to me. But also one thing that didn't come up through all of this is that what it does to us folks who advocate for those on the inside. A lot of family members and friends have walked away from me because I work with incarcerated folks, including my own daughter, who disowned me 3 years ago for this work. I haven't heard a word from her since. So it's really hard, and I have a big mouth. I just don't, I'm still doing the work, so that's how much I believe in what I do. But it is hard for the family and advocates out here too, who get scrutinized for the kind of work that they do. But it's been an education. And when we hear lifer, oftentimes we think lifer means a homicide. That's not true. Kimmy, my author, is serving life for stealing a car battery. He's in on the 3 strikes law, and all 3 of his crimes were nonviolent. So that's another problem in society, is we think that if someone's in prison for life, they've murdered someone. That's not always the case. So Kimmy works really hard from the inside, getting people out by using the laws and learning the law. And he says it's kind of a joke in there that other folks will say to him, "You're getting everybody else out, but you can't get yourself out." But he works really hard from the inside too. But I guess I just wanted to give you those books before we close tonight. That the authors wanted you to have the books. The anthology book, there's 8 authors who contributed to that book, and the stories are heart-wrenching, but like you, they state the facts. They don't place blame on anyone. They take accountability for what they did, but they state the facts. They're all born in poverty and drugs and the streets and all that, and then that is just so impressive to me that that's not what they did in their stories. And the anthology was inspired by Kimya's short story, The Shaping of a Convict. So it's about their childhood, what got them to where they are. Even though I don't like the word convict, but it's the preface of the book too. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you do.
Just a comment for you.
For the back.
And I feel badly that, you've lost family and friends over this, but I guess I look at it from even my career, always do what's right. Leave the consequences to God.
It's their loss, not mine.
It's their loss, not you do what's right. Because at the end of the day, it's you.
Thank you.
It was Paul on the end, is that right? Yeah.
Just say the old guy.
A bit of a tangent to something he said about, working in prison to help people to, when they get out. I worked at DOC for 5 years, just in IT, so I wasn't actually dealing with, offenders, but when you start, you have to take a orientation class or something. And one of the things they said in that, which has stuck with me for many years, is often the public or politicians tend to think that people, send them to prison, throw away the key, and we don't have to think about it anymore, they'll do the time. But very few offenders are actually in for life. Most come out at some point.
The vast majority, right?
Yeah, the vast majority come out at some point, and so prison should be thinking about how to get those people out so they can live a life and don't reoffend, and to, you know, try and think of it in that way and not just, oh, well, throw them in and have them deal with their issues or, you know, whatever, that they are gonna be coming out. We have to think about that, and, you know, it's a part of the process.
Absolutely, and Partners in Hope, a lot of times, and we have, every Wednesday we have the huddle, and we have circuit court judges there, law enforcement's there, probation and parole, DOC employees, and probation and parole, the agents we see love these guys, and they want them to succeed so badly. But I will bet 90% that show up at the door on Wednesday night, they've been released a day before, 2 days before, 3 days before, walk in the door with the clothes on their back and nothing else. They can't balance a checkbook, they haven't had anything to eat, you know, and we stock food, we've got clothes, but you see this week after week and go, the DOC has had years to prep these guys and gals to get out. They can't balance a checkbook. They can't, you know, do the normal, operate a smartphone is just foreign. You might as well be doing physics. And it's like, we have failed if you have not taught these people the bare minimum basics.
I wanted to kind of touch on that as well with the concept of the lifer, I think, view we hold sometimes, because I feel in this space what happens often is that we will get a little more accepting of one group, but then other ones still not accepted fully. And it's like the goal in the end has to be everybody is viewed as somebody we need to treat as, you know, worthy of whatever opportunities and humanizing we can, you know, present with them. And I think lifers, Adam was a lifer, right? So you hear that concept and you think, oh, okay, you know, lifer or whatever, people that are in prison for life, they don't deserve to get, you know, focused because they're never coming home. But you don't know that. Like, some of them actually are coming home, either when there's appeal, or in Adam's case, parole, or in the case of, I was talking to Ed about this, I was in Waupun at a restorative justice panel talking to men at the Castle, which is Waupun's one of the 4 maximum security facilities. And there was a guy that put his hand up and he's trying to find out how to better himself because he's a peer support specialist in the prison. And he says, you know, I have a life sentence, nobody responded to that, I'm not looking for any sympathy, I'm just telling you in the context of my question. And so I got the, you know, a chance to say something to him later on about how you may have a life sentence, but you're as important as anyone coming home, because every person that you affect in there, you're coming home every time. Those people that you were able to impact and better their life. So you can't expect people in prison who are just coming home to get the focus, because they're still around people who aren't coming home. So they have such an impact on the people that are coming home, and a lot of them, they want to find purpose. So they have a life sentence and they can become what the system is not doing. They can become the correctors, they can become the builders. And so this is something I think is really important to point out, that lifers are as important as the guy who has a day in prison in there. It's the whole community is affected if we're not focusing on everybody.
Shannon, there's quite a lot of people here. Have you thought about how we could help you in any way? Like, can we get this film to show it in small groups in our living room with a study guide to talk to people about it? Or what can we do of everybody in this room to get this message out?
Yeah, I mean, that's, sure. I mean, yeah. Right. Yeah, I think I would like to have that as a next conversation with somebody that contacts us that wants to do that, and we can do it. I don't have the mental capacity right now to think about how we can do that. But yes, we're doing another version of this in Madison, the Thompson Center, in the crazy world that has happened where we now are like connected to Kelly Thompson, Tommy Thompson's daughter, and she, you know, helps us with a lot of stuff. But we're doing an event that'll have videos from both seasons. It won't be a launch exactly, and we're focusing on legislators in Madison after the session opens up and getting a lot of UW students up to go attend. So we're looking to do these more often for sure, but yes, I would say yes.
Hi, my name is Alicia, and I just loved it. And one thing that take away from this is how you said not leading about your story. Cause I too have a story. I started a business, Purpose to Prosperity, but I led with my story of being incarcerated. And then I had to think about when you guys were presenting that it was shown upon, you know, so I'm that person who don't care if it is because I'm still starting off with my story. And I've helped so many people, and maybe I've already changed the narrative. So I really want to get involved.
I just want to know, like, we know that like trauma behind being incarcerated, and I want to know if any one of y'all like went to therapy. Like, did anybody get access to therapy or find any like help
Inside or afterwards?
afterward, like right now?
Okay.
Yeah, I can answer that in a different type of way than probably you expect. It's because, no, I never got any therapy. But what happened with me personally, when people ask me about prison and what it done with me and why I don't have the issues that they expected me to have, I said, well, when I was living my street life, I was a dehumanized person. I didn't have any emotion. I didn't have any feeling because the lifestyle that I lived had took all of that away. From the little kid that did have dreams, emotions, feelings, and all of that stuff, by the time I was 24, all of that was gone. I was a cold individual. And my grandmom used to always say, don't let your heart get hard. And I think that's what happened to me. But when I got arrested and I was incarcerated, I began to get my feelings back. I used to say things like, I don't care. And when I got in prison, I started to care again. You know, so people ask me the effects of like how it affected me personally. It brought me back. It didn't, man, what did prison do to you? Man, it made me human again. Because before that, the last 4, 5, 6 years before I went in, I was terrible. So to understand what the effects of prison with Ed is that it was the reversed effect of what everybody would assume. Like, man, it turned me into the hardest working guy. It turned me into a respectable individual. It turned me into the person that my family intended for me to be in the beginning. And I got away from all of those principles. I got away from all of that. So once I got incarcerated, I reverted back. I said, my parents always told me this was gonna happen. They always said this. So all of those things that they instilled in me at a young age, I reverted back to that, and that's what carried me. What my granddad told me, what my grandmom told me, all of that stuff I thought was old and outdated, and that was in the 50s and 60s. That ain't nothing. But now I found out about, fire. You stick your hand in fire in 2022, it's hot now, it was hot in 1922. Nothing has really changed when it comes to right and wrong. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Like Paul mentioned earlier, just do right, right? So when people ask those questions, I'll be like, man, it didn't happen for me like that. It was the reversed effect. And one last thing I want to say about that is that with me having these reverse effects, it was because of what was instilled in me at an early age. And I found out while I was in, a lot of individuals didn't get that. So I found myself passing on some of the life lessons that my parents and grandparents had given me to the guys in there. I was just regurgitating what I was taught. Like my granddaddy told me, if you do this, this was gonna happen. So I'm in here 24 years old talking to 45-year-old men saying, hey man, my granddaddy said this, you need to listen. And they be like looking at me like they never got it. But you find out that I was incarcerated mentally before I was incarcerated physically. It just took time for my body to catch up. And I know these guys can understand that incarceration because it's a mental thing first. You didn't just wake up one day and go to prison. So this therapy thing goes all the way back to you taking every step to get in there. So therapy didn't start like, oh, I went to prison and I need therapy. No, you needed therapy like way before then, because that would have stopped you from getting in there. So I'm just saying that to say the narrative is, you've been to prison, you need therapy. No, I know a lot of people that haven't been to prison. They need therapy.
Yes. I want to add to that a bit about, there's been a lot more with peer support specialists, so that people that are formerly incarcerated becoming certified both inside and outside to guide individuals coming home. And we're trying to do a lot more in that space to have, I mean, the idea would be everybody coming home has at least one person that they can connect with that's formerly incarcerated to help them, you know, segue into this you know, freedom part of it. And so that's I think a concrete thing that is going on. Like Ed, my story is very similar, where I never feel comfortable answering that question because I feel, I guess, a sense of survivor's guilt, because I was given a lot before I went in, and I was able to tap back into that. Like I lost it some way, and when I got locked up, it was like, okay, look around. Oh, you got some actual resources and tools to find your way out of here. Like most people don't though, and that stood out to me so glaringly when I got locked up. That it wasn't I'm better than these people. It was like I was given something they have not been given, and that's a big part of what I think drives me in this work. Is that, you know, I don't know, I don't have an answer to why that is, but I honor it. I definitely acknowledge it, and I think that the peer support part is the closest we've gotten to having really reliable therapy for people when they get out, because there's not going to be enough therapists getting paid to do this work if we don't do that.
Hey, Shannon, I want to ask her some questions.
I didn't really see who it was, if you can kind of raise your hand. Okay, so therapy. I've been in therapy since I was a kid. Never paid attention to it. Like followed mom through the women's shelters. I had a rough upbringing, and something like what he was saying. I always knew I was going to prison. I told my wife. I think I told you guys that I always knew since I was a young man. I knew that I was going to end up in prison. It wasn't a matter of if; it was a matter of when. But fortunately for me, I don't know if I said that earlier. I'm from Illinois.
6 times.
You're 7. And I transferred to a prison called Sheridan Correctional Center. And they had therapy there, right? And you were forced to participate in that therapy. And even if we sat in a group, it was 50 guys, 100 guys. Even if you didn't participate in that moment, right? And these guys can relate. The minute you walk away and you lay your head on that pillow, and it's just you and your mind, oh man, you're going through therapy. You're all the questions they ask you, you're about your moral compass, about your stinking thinking, or your poor decision making. It's there, and it resonates, and you're going to carry it with you, right? And part of that, part of my parole was I had to go to therapy. So. Yeah, and I'm not ashamed of saying therapy, shit. A lot of us need it, so I'm in therapy, so shit. Good for you. Yeah. Good for you.
We got about 5 minutes for a couple more questions.
She already added.
Oh, cool, okay.
I apologize, this is not so much of a question as it is, thank you for everybody who opened up and told their stories. It's very powerful. Thank you for bringing up peer support specialists, because we are important in the community. Probably the best therapy you're gonna get. But I did want to mention as well, for those of us who have experienced life as such, I don't think that we want so much sympathy as we want empathy. And I think that's gonna be easier for people who haven't experienced poverty or drug addiction or mental health, because of the prevalence that it's having in communities outside of the norm, quote unquote. So we're all gonna be forced to face the necessity to be empathetic to people who are struggling with mental health, substance use disorder, with criminal thinking and actions, because that's all tied in together. So I think this was like one of the most powerful things I've watched in a really long time. And I tell people that I encounter regularly, I say, hey, look, I just didn't get caught. And that was just the mercy that was given to me, the grace and the mercy. I'm currently working with people who have been found not guilty due to mental defect. And I just encourage people in the community to embrace that as well, because that's got a high stigma on it as well. When I tell people what I do, they're like, what? They're like, they did that, like heinous crimes, like the gentleman up there was talking about, and having to have that empathy, that open-mindedness to say, hey, that person wasn't well. So there's some real powerful stuff going on here, and I really, really want to thank you guys for sharing.
So Shannon, I really love the work that you've been doing with correcting the narrative. I think I wanted to share with the circle here tonight, or the group, that I was locked out of RCI tonight. And what that means is I've been volunteering inside Racine Correctional for the last 11 years, doing emotional healing work with inmates. And so when we talk about, therapy, we don't do therapy, but what we do is we sit with inside folks and give them a therapeutic experience to face their trauma and the experiences that they've encountered from from childhood beyond. And we're part of a network of prison organizations outside prison organizations across the country, from California to Wisconsin to Boston, where people are literally sitting inside, giving folks an opportunity to learn how to emote in ways they never learned in their families of origin, so that while they are still inside, they are able to have a better bid inside. And generally it keeps them out of the hole, and when they get released, they generally don't come back. And we are, the Boston group has just hired a reentry director, and I want to get a copy of this to give to him so that they can use it out there, because he's somebody that was incarcerated. He was a lifer that was released. He's been out for 12 years, perfect for this role, but they are working to provide support on the outside for folks that have sat and done this work on the inside. And it's important for the people in this room to know that it's not just the people on the outside that do the work, but we're also doing it on the inside. It could be expanded, but the DOC has limitations, and we were locked out because I think there was an attempted escape from RCI this week, and they're in a real security lockdown mode. But it's been very enlightening. People we sit with believe it's the safest room in the house for them, because we don't take notes. Nothing that we hear goes back to the DOC, and it gives people an opportunity to express in ways they never did in their families of origin. So, thanks.
And so, absolutely. The other side of our work is pre-entry, and we just do a lot to try and focus on people before they come out, like well before they come out. Not 6 months, not a year, but like you just got in and you got 30 years, like we want to, connect with you first day and start getting you on a good path. And so that pre-entry side is what Randy's talking about. And so those programs are massively important. Before we go to the last question, just want to remind, we're going to go to, again, Hacienda at the end of this. Anybody wants to, talk still. So I do not work for them. I'm not plugging them. Never been there before. Just to emphasize that. Just a place that's around the corner. See the last question.
So I just wanted to say that I think it's super cool that these last couple of comments have been about trauma, about mental health, about therapy, healing. I appreciate the guy in the back who said that, who brought up people's trauma and healing from that afterwards, if they're going to therapy, and the fact that he's in therapy as well. I do want to say that when they came out and they talked to us, that's my husband up there with the stripes, but what he said about it being a human experience is true. It's so helpful to be able to discuss that story and process it. But the thing is, both Robert and Ed covered this while they were talking. I think Shannon commented on it too, is that there was all this trauma before prison, right? And that creates that yellow brick road, right, to get there. And any of us could have those traumas, right? Any of us could have ended up in similar situations given the path that people we see before us were on. So I think it's really important that we're recognizing that people are getting the help that they need. If you could get it and prevent yourself from getting to prison by addressing those traumas and not following what you think is your path, because it doesn't have to be, that's great. If you can get it while you're there, that's great. Wherever you can get that help, you get it. But I also want to say that we can't just point at other people and be like, well, they're struggling and they need that, and that's for their trauma and their stuff, because we all have something. Like, as spouses of people who have been incarcerated, as their right-hand person, we're dealing with that trauma too. And if you don't help, you want to help your partner heal, right? But if you're not healing, you're a wreck and a hot ass mess. Trust that. Like, you both need to be a team, and you need to take care of yourselves and each other the whole way through. And that needs to not just extend to your partner, but to your neighbors and your community and everybody in this way. Because if we let everybody next to us be broken and be like, that's for you to fix, and not be accountable to what we have to fix in ourselves, then nobody's gonna get any better. And I think that's why this is super awesome that you guys are doing it. Because those stories need to be heard, and people don't feel you how they feel you until they hear your story, because that makes it real. So thank you guys for doing that.
I guess I can say in 2 nights that we're done.
You said last.
We're done. Thank you all. Oh.
Something on that with prevention, we're kind of moving into, there's a phone out there that's actually a real prison phone. If you pick it up once I go out there and connect with police group, those are stories of children whose parents were incarcerated. So we started thinking more about prevention and like how can we adjust that yellow brick road? Because there's a statistic that says if you are a child of a parent who's incarcerated, you're 6 times more likely to go into prison yourself. So we thought it would be really interesting to explore that idea and hear the child's voice, which is something that I really haven't come across in this work. And interviewing from like a 7-year-old boy to an 18-year-old woman, like it was just super fascinating. Talk about hearing kids like stories from these children. So I've edited together, it's 15 minutes long, but if you scan the QR code, you can just save it on your phone and listen whenever you want, if you want. So I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
So I'm a social worker, and I deal with a lot of kids through my job. And a lady asked about what we can do. That's a perfect segue. What we can do is advocate for children whose parents are incarcerated. Their parents are not throwaways. Because when we say, well, that dad's locked up or mom's locked up, we don't have to worry about them. We're destroying that baby too. Because they still need their mom and dad. So we need to fight for them to still have that contact so that they can help develop a relationship and build from it and not end up in the same spot. So that's what we can be, you guys. We can be those voices for the babies that don't have them.
Thank you very much, everyone.